Let's get started, because otherwise if we wait more, you're going to relax and then you won't pay attention. We have this session is entitled From COP21 to COP23, a critical assessment, and I think it would be very interesting indeed to hear about the critical part of that assessment, because I've spoken to a few people about the COP in the last few days, and I've also seen the ETUC resolution that was done prior to the meeting that's calling for, of course, a whole bunch of things that were not considered or accepted. So I expect that we'll hear some interesting things. We have over here Morgad Le Naour from Hungary, who's with Greenpeace in Hungary, who's going to speak to us about that. Javier Benito Zuluaga from Podemos, he's in the European Parliament. So that will be interesting that we get his views. And then we still have Stefan here, who just moved. I took this chair, he took another one. And he's still with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Yeah, we don't want to have too many people too long here, but it's okay. So what we're going to try to do, because it's 16:15, we're going to try to speed up a bit for the intervention so that you can still ask questions, and then we can still have a concluding discussion at the end. So without ado, I'm going to then the reverse order we've been speaking in and start with Stefan, so that we can have his view and his comments on the 2 years that are separating us from COP21 to COP23.
Hi, and thanks, and sorry for speaking again. I would like to speak in German. I'm quicker in German. Ich bringe heute vor allem.
So the main thing I'm bringing with me today is questions, really. But I also have a few thoughts on the matter, so I won't be able to keep it entirely brief. I'd like to start with Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything. A few years ago, in that book, she highlighted the contradiction between climate change and capitalism. The book's fairly thick. And according to her, climate change and the horrors of climate change, which are becoming more and more clear, should force us as a global community to redefine society and to carry out basic reforms of what we are currently pursuing as a social and economic model. She sees the climate change crisis as an opportunity for us. However, it doesn't look as if this opportunity is really being taken at international climate conferences. In fact, if you look at Naomi Klein's arguments, which is where we currently stand with climate change and how little we're actually achieving as a global community, one can say that it's fairly frustrating. Paris was the largest international conference of parties in history, and most people commenting on it assessed it as being quite a success. What could be achieved was the general consensus, and I think that analysis may well be true, but that is actually what makes it so catastrophic, because the maximum of what can be achieved is still very far off from what should be achieved in order to meet the challenges that we're facing. So the states jointly agreed on CO2 targets, but they're not sufficient to meet the 2-degree target. We're now also seeing that the national targets are not being met, which is even worse, and there's been a lot of other negative developments that will be caused by some of the global action that has been taken. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. So now 2 years later, COP23 took place in Germany, and if, as I do, you work in a left-wing institution based in Germany, you tend to meet people who have a very positive climate image of Germany. And as someone who deals with climate change issues in Germany, that can be quite irritating, and a lot of people who are active in the climate justice movement are very annoyed by this. People like Naomi Klein also use Germany as a positive example. She did that in her book and said, look at Germany, and I was pleased that Jesse mentioned Macron and not Angela Merkel as the climate chancellor, because she simply isn't. Fine, okay, Germany doesn't produce tar sands and we only carry out experimental fracking, but when it comes to lignite, we're top of the rank globally. There's no country in the world that burns as much brown coal or lignite as Germany does, which is a fact. So this meant that in the German context, this climate conference was also accompanied by many protests. The largest demonstration that Germany had ever seen on climate change, with 15,000 people, took place in Bonn, but also one of the largest actions of civil disobedience took place, and almost 2,000 people participated on an illegal action of civil disobedience, and almost 2,000 people from all of Europe came together, stating that they would block the coal mine and take a stand, saying that words are not enough, we need action. Now, we've just heard the concept of just transition described by Molly. It's a trade union concept, and we need to talk about it. We need to talk about how it is filled with life outside of trade unions as well. I myself am a member of a trade union. I participate in collective bargaining rounds. I go to demonstrations. I recruit new members for our trade union, but I'm also a climate activist in my spare time as well, and I see that the two worlds are completely separate. In Bonn or in the Lausitz region, whenever such protests take place in Germany or in other countries, we often find ourselves in confrontations between different left-wing activist groups who end up confronting one another. And these movements, we don't need to talk about what is a just transition, but what does the concept of just even mean to us? There are many different narratives about what is meant by just and justice, and a climate activist who may be supported by someone, by people living on an island that may well be underwater in a few decades, which was the case. People travelled to Germany, travelled to Bonn from such an island, which is threatened in its very existence by climate change. So they came there, and a climate activist has a point of view of justice which is global, and we say we're using so many resources, it's simply not sustainable. Just as a quick reminder, the European Union promised that 40% of greenhouse gases would be reduced by 2030 compared to 1990. And in the field of electricity, which we're mainly talking about, we're coming close, 30% at the EU level. Germany's a little above that, but it's still not enough. The forecast for the European Union is that the promises that were made in Paris will only be met to 75% at most, and the other 25% simply won't be met. And that's considering that the European Union is fairly rich. And then, of course, other countries looked at the EU and said, well, you with all your economic power, you that use so much energy, and you who have been pumping CO2 into the atmosphere for, decades now, if you can't manage it, how are we going to manage it? So that's what's happening on the one hand. And on the other side, we have trade unionists who also have understanding of justice, and coal installations used to be the core of trade union movements and democracy in Europe as we know it. I have a grandfather who used to work in coal. But that narrative, of course, doesn't match the climate narrative. And so here we have two left-wing ideas facing off and talking about transition. Now, transition of the coal sector is highly important. It's a big sector and a big challenge, particularly in Germany. The challenge that we face, socio-economically sustainable transition at a global level, as I would like to see it, compared to that, moving away from coal in Germany and in other places isn't that big a challenge. If we look at automotive manufacturing or rural or agricultural manufacturing and how the export model of my country works, we know that that simply isn't a sustainable model, but we need examples where just transition is working. And the issue that I have, the question I have, is whether you see such a narrative at a large global level. I have to be able to go to trade unionists and tell them this is how we want to do it. And Germany has a lot of experience with transformation. I'm from Eastern Germany, and transformation there is something that happens to people. It's not something that people actually have much of a say in, and they're very skeptical of it. Now, in a lot of lignite companies, the employees were bought out or were able to be phased out at fairly good conditions. But again, it's not sustainable. We need models, we need narratives at a large level of successful transformation. Otherwise, society will be against us. And this is nothing new. You're all aware of this. But this is what I would like to contribute to our discussion here today. What are the large-scale examples of a successful transition that we can use and that we can show people in order to show that transition is something that we can make together? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We're going to move forward, and Virdag is going to talk to us on the same topic about her views of the road from COP21 to COP23. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. And just for speedity, I will speak in Hungarian. No. Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm the campaign strategist for Greenpeace, and I've been working on our position on just transition the last year or so. So what I would like to share is really, yes, a couple of questions, but also an analysis of how I see, following up on Stefan's agenda setting about how unions and the Greens or the climate activists are interacting at the moment. So yes, it was Paris also when Greenpeace first published a joint statement with unions around 100% renewable energy and an affordable and accessible transition for all. And 2 years down the line, what we have seen in Bonn is that just transition has really become a mainstream, or like at least a hot topic in the discussion rooms. And I think this really is a massive achievement of decades of hard work of the union movement. So I really think it's an amazing achievement. But certainly my impression is that we are getting to a different stage in the debate, pretty much turning point here for various reasons. I think we can say just transition is on the agenda, but how it is going to be defined and by whom it is going to be defined is a very topical question, I think, for looking into COP24, which is going to be held in Silesia, the heartland, coal heartland of Poland, as you know. So we have seen, as probably partly a result of the Paris Agreement, we have seen unprecedented drop in coal usage, just to look at, the energy sector. Although on the global level, it's mostly driven by emerging economies like China and India. But certainly you see a massive drop in investing in coal and delivering even on agreed projects. So it is happening, right? And the question is how we approach this situation. maybe 10 years ago, a Greenpeace campaigner would have really celebrated this achievement, but right now what we are doing is asking the question, is this right that is mostly driven by the market? And where are the decision makers and where are the communities here? Because we also see, and I think it was ironically someone from the B team who have said it on yet another Just Transition conference, that maybe there isn't a transition that is not a just transition. So it isn't going to happen if people are not part of this. And we can look around, you know, I mean, recently what happened in the US, you know, on how directly affected communities can actually turn a page on politics, on international politics. But we can also see how this is actually playing out in Germany right now, and also in some other countries. So basically, it's very important to look at, and even more important, I think we are at the era where the socio-political dimension of the transition is something that nobody can avoid. And what the positive developments of the last 3 years, I think, are how non-state actors, and especially sub-national entities like cities and regions, have really stepped up in the game. I think in the context of just transition, you also see that as a major force for change. You can see a lot of just transition announcements coming from subnational governments these days. So I see there a big potential for actually pushing national governments. And also the other big force is really the technological development and how it actually makes the whole solutions-based or renewable energy-based transition more cheaper and accessible to a lot of people. I think these are certainly important elements of the last, or developments of the last 3 years. But as I said, we are concerned about how much it is currently driven or dominantly driven by the market, and that needs to really change. The gaps, what we see, are really the delay with political action, especially at the national level. And I think the COP23 recently, as Stefan had outlined, it was a clear example of how governments are still in the business of not making real progress. I think it's a big issue. Even if you look at, you know, major announcements like the powering past coal. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting the name of this amazing coalition led by Canada and the UK. Well, if you see that, you know, I mean, the countries that signed up, especially from Europe, are not insignificant in terms of coal production and usage, whereas they are quite significant in using oil and producing gas and tar sands. So, I mean, it's fairly hypocritical, I think, in the light of how much things have to be done. But certainly, Canada is a positive example when it comes to subnational just transition initiatives. Although, again, Alberta is not famous for coal, as we know, and coal struggles, rather the tar sands, but certainly something where we can see some progress. And the other big gap of the last 2 years, is an almost complete absence of the topic from the corporate boardrooms. So the recognition, beyond obviously the big words, the recognition and the real engagement of the business sector in sharing, in the burden sharing question. Obviously, a big part of it is financing, but not just. It's about sharing the responsibility on just transition, one could say, not just privatizing the profit, but also privatizing the social responsibility of actually rehabilitating whole regions and communities and supporting them to get out of the dependency of the fossil fuel industry. I think these are two big and significant issues that we need to address in the coming years. And what we see, I think a big topic for the coming 12 months, especially around Katowice, is going to be who claims just transition and what does this really mean. We have already seen that evolving in Bonn around the marketing of the Polish government on the location of COP24. Clearly, Poland has gone through a massive transformation of losing nearly 200,000 coal jobs the last 2 decades. So they have something to share, and there is certainly an important contribution. But whether this is what you can call a just transition, and whether they are actually basing it on what we call in Greenpeace the real solutions, that is all open questions. And we really think that, yes, just transition is a union-led agenda, and it is about workers being the agents of change in transition, in creating the 1.5 world. We also think, as my colleague Takis have said, that it is also about capitalizing on the vast potential of renewable energy technologies for decentralization, for energy democracy, for addressing energy poverty issues. So for us, it's really important that, and I think there is an open question still, to some extent, how the unions and the climate movement can agree on what we call the real solutions. So I think we agree on where the solutions should be, who the solutions should be driven by, and that it needs to be the workforce and their communities, but how much we're actually fully behind 100% renewable future is, I think, still an open question which we need to discuss. And as Stefan said, mostly these discussions need to take place at the local level, because I think at the international level we are fairly on agreement and we support each other and we show solidarity. When it comes to the Lausitz, when it comes to other places where the real battle is taking place about livelihoods and resources and future generations, I think this is something where we really need to come together and agree, fight those fights out and agree. Unfortunately, I missed the section about how we can engage local stakeholders, but certainly one of the things that I keep hearing from Sharon Burrow whenever I see her in a conference is that the workers need to be informed about the real situation, and they have the right to know what is going to happen with them. And if they know that, they will make the informed choices, and that is going to be pushing for a just transition and demanding their fair share in shaping their own future and their children's future. So I think it's a very important point of making sure that people are aware of what is happening. The last thing, time. Okay, so then probably that was it. So again, key points are, I think we have to look into corporate responsibility and how much corporations are taking up this, and also how we can agree on the important issues around just transition among the climate and the workers' movements. I remember the last point, again, from Sharon Burrow. So the union movement needs more climate activists, and the climate movement needs more union activists. And I think that really sums it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like that conclusion. That was very clever. Yeah. I have to make sure I remember it. Now, Javier, who is a member of the European Parliament from Podemos, is going to give us his own comment on these issues on the road from 21 to 23 and beyond.
Okay, so thanks to everybody, and thanks also for the invitation to this second conference on just transition, which actually I think is very useful and a very good initiative. Well, our main paper here is to talk about the conference of climate and with a critical assessments. A conference COPs that each year looks more and more like some kind of tourism expo or national expo with a lot of face washing, greenwashing for big polluters, and also showing like technological supposed solution like new future cars or something like that. And I think this is the worst phase we can see in the fight against climate change. So Paris Agreement was sold as an important step, but behind this political message that was given, the tools were and still are very limited. The fundamental contradiction of the Paris Agreement in our point of view is that the objective, that 1.5 to 2 degrees limitation, the summatory of the ENDCs, the national contributions, are not sufficient. The summatory reach at least to a scenario of 3 degrees. So we think that this must be solved, or this is a problem of a lack of an ambition and also a lack of binding contributions to these climate agreements. Because after the failure of the Kyoto Protocol, the parties decide this voluntary contribution, or this not binding contribution, and until today there is no agreement on how these non-binding contributions will be phased up. No? They talk about some transparency mechanisms, some negotiation for the national contributions, but there is not a concrete scenarios for this. So we think that in the international level we must talk always about binding targets. And the focus is not to, the main focus is not to put the reason of global warming. This is not, and there is no explicit mention on the need of a drastically change of our productive system into a less demanding one, or what is the same, a more sustainable system. And in this change, we must talk very honestly in the decrease of our consumption of fossil fuels and our consumption of energy. Also, when we talk on energy transition, we think that energy transition is not a change of technology, it's also a change of paradigm of the way we consume energy and the way energy is faced. No, it's not only a market issue, it's also a basic right of people. So in this scenario from COP21, we traveled in this road for 2 years in COP22 and COP23, and well, these two COPs were supposed to implement this Paris Agreement, but in fact there is no such major progress made, to be honest, and also from our point of view. An example, no commitments for development countries, especially the EU, were made to finance green funds, or also there were not clear and big pre-2020 actions or agreements. Also in this COP23 we see a very alarming situation that finally doesn't go further, but it was the intention of create a new subsidiary body to give more power to the big energy companies, which actually they are officially out of the official discussions, but with this proposal that was made to the Ukrainian delegation and finally not presented in the negotiations, but Big Energy wanted to stay there and wanted to stay with an official voice. So I think that they are too many present in the climate conversations, but we need to fight against the official presence in these negotiations. There are some good news in this last conference of climate also, but very little, but also there are good news. For example, the first time that a gender action plan was launched, and this gender action plan recognized the women at the that they are the firstly affected by climate change. And but as I said, there is little good news because unfortunately, according to feminist organizations, the financing of this action plan is not sufficient now. So it's not good news, new news. And also, well, the creation of the final creation of the indigenous consulting group promoted by the Guardians of the Forest is also very little advance. Also, there are few initiatives that have been mentioned here, more from outside the official discussions, but I think good initiatives for the issue we are talking in this conference, the issue of just transition, is the first is the initiative taken by first Canada and UK, but later more than 20 countries launched a global alliance to phase out from coal. Spain, of course, is not a member of this alliance yet, unfortunately. And well, they have agreed on a phase out of existing traditional coal power and place to a moratorium or end of coal to 2030. I think we have to start talking also about the fight against gas fossil, which is being sold as the new friend of renewable energy. Was, in my opinion, is something crazy. And well, outside this official and international declaration, I think this conference of climate have been present very interesting and good social initiatives against or to end coal. One was the End Coal, launched in the very beginning of the conference, and the second one was the Beyond Coal initiative, launched at the end of the climate conference, which both campaigns are involved from civil society groups from over 28 countries around across Europe. So these are good social initiatives, and also it's good to mention the Ende Gelände initiative that I was there this year and the previous year, and was a very great international movement that we have to start taking into account. Well, just to be very brief in the Podemos position of just transition. To be honest, it's a very sensitive issue. We can agree inside. We are a new political party, but sometimes we still face the traditional discussions, no? And I think we can all of us agree in the just transition inside Podemos, I mean. But well, just transition is also a big term, no? That all of us can agree with it. So just to contribute to the debate, I think it's important when we talk about just transition to talk also about what speeches, what messages, and what times we want to face for this just transition. And well, my idea of a political idea that I want to send here to end is that we must start doing a fight of political speech and start talking about coal end against the coal close. No, that to different these two positions, a coal end I think is an end with participation of regions and workers, with the recognition of coal workers and coal regions to the history, but also as we are talking with alternatives. And I think that for alternatives is clearly important when two issues. The first one is to assume that we must end with coal and give a true message to workers, and with this assuming that coal must end, we need to organize all the social workers and national or regional levels to build alternatives, not with a magical solution that doesn't exist, but with complete participation and taking part of the people. No? And for this we need also a very European but also national industry policies or strategies, because it's not a thing of building new industrial areas. We also need to fill it with industry. It's not about making labor training, it's also about to create real opportunities, and this is, for this we need a complete industrial action also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let us
Super.
I was going to introduce Cornelia.
Okay.
She introduced herself, but she missed our early session, so I think now it's time for her to have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude.
I'm going to be speaking my mother tongue, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. I've got here for the end. I'm surprised I even managed that. The traffic is so bad. That's another subject we could discuss. But I wanted to follow on from Xavier. We're both MEPs in the same parliamentary group. And the Spanish and the German left agree on a lot of things. And we're heading up the campaign for a just transition. Both parties and the left in general don't have an easy ride when it comes to coal. That's become apparent, I think, from the discussions here. It's nevertheless important that people should get involved. Never mind how difficult it is. And we've been trying to do this. We've been working together very closely on all of these questions over the past 2 years, and I'm proud. I'm proud of that. What I wanted to say was that I come from one of these regions. It's not Lausitz, but Saxony. Upper Lausitz is represented. I think that what we have to achieve, and here I agree with Xavier, we have to create confidence for the people who live in these places, for as long as they still live there. They've been through a lot. I've talked about this in other bodies. They've been through transitions. And it didn't even start with coal, glass, textile, it all came and went away in the east, Lausitz. Complete deindustrialisation. There was a bit of coal left. Now there have been further reductions. A few weeks ago, Bombardier decided to leave. So did Siemens. So we have no idea now what the future holds for this region, what the prospects there are. It's very bleak. Workers wonder what's going to happen to them, whether they're going to be able to stay at all. And when we talk about coal, we need to involve these people from day one. Otherwise, we will never get the acceptance that we need, because obviously people cling to what they still have, even if it's a straw, a little bit of tourism, forests, and the foxes and the wolves are back, as we always hear at conferences like this. And that's why we as MEPs, and I'm speaking here as an MEP, have to make sure that we take a holistic approach. We need an approach that brings new prospects for people who live in these places. We need a cross-cutting approach when we talk about the winter package. We have to fight every inch of the way when it comes to renewables. We have to do the same with energy efficiency and with employment policy. What's important for us is above all the creation of climate jobs. And if we don't have this holistic approach, these regions will fail, collapse, as other similar regions in the world have done. And that's the point, really. And if it goes wrong again, well, we know what we have to fear in these regions: radicalization. And we can't have that. I come from Saxony, as I've said. The AfD, the right-wing populists, are the biggest party, not the second or the third. They could form a government if there were to be Landtag elections now. We have lost huge numbers of votes in my region. All the parties, the old parties, the Conservatives too. If we mess up this time, we will lose these regions. We will lose them completely. That has to be clear. Everything that's been submitted on the just transition is too little. We've looked at the winter package, energy markets, the just transition article, the setting up of a fund, and so on and so forth. But we need more demands, stronger demands. Otherwise this could fail, and I think we all know that. But my area and my country and Xavier's country have signed up to this end coal agreement. It's important that others should sign up too, and that's how we can win the day. But there's not much time left. I feel as if it's 5 to 12, and we need to convey that to people and tackle the problems. And I hope that Xavier will be visiting us in Lausitz next year when we talk to people there and talk about their future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. Let's go to the comments and question and answers. So if you have something either to ask the three speakers or the materials that Cornelia provided, we're going to take 3 questions and then open up to answers. Yes, Olivier, and then you afterwards. And then I see your hand but no face over there. And the hand is waving, so yeah, you get started.
Oui, bonjour. Je voudrais revenir un peu
Yeah.
sur ce qui a été dit, notamment
I'd like
par
to
notre
come back to what our German colleague said.
Il me demandait à un moment donné quel était
He
un
asked
exemple
for an
de
example
transition énergétique qui avait été
of an energy
réussi,
transition,
concret.
a successful
On avait changé,
example,
totalement d'énergie.
a change in energy source, something radical and exemplary. There is an example from recent history, something quite extraordinary. Japan. It's not about coal, it's about nuclear energy. In Japan they had 55 reactors. Now compare that with France, which has 58. So Japan was the country second on the list of the countries with most nuclear reactors, but after Fukushima they changed that overnight. They have closed down 54 of those nuclear power plants. At the moment I think they still have 2 running and they manage on that. So that's an example. 80% of energy consumption in Japan was electricity produced from nuclear. And this is a world power, a world industrial power, and yet almost overnight they managed to shed 80% of their electrical energy. That could give us some ideas, some avenues to explore for after coal. I'm quite surprised, really, that no reports have been written about this. It's a really interesting case. How have the Japanese reacted? Well, as could be expected, really. They started by cutting their energy consumption hugely, making huge savings, about 30%, simply reducing their consumption. Now, obviously, people in Europe and France might not be ready to do the same thing, but they banned air conditioning. In Tokyo, in August, it's 40 degrees, 42 degrees, but the Japanese don't switch the air conditioning on. They go to their office, they perspire all day, but they don't switch the air conditioning on. That might be a lot to ask of any nation, but reducing consumption was the focus of so much political will and will of the people that they could do it. They also started up their oil-fired power stations again. Now some may say that's no better. Perhaps it's slightly less polluting than coal, but it's not the universal panacea. But this happened immediately after Fukushima, in the months that followed Fukushima, and they are the third energy power in the world. The Japanese decided to develop a form of energy that they had close to them. While they were closing down the traditional oil-fired power stations, they worked on geothermic heating for their buildings. Now, a French company has been involved in this. You don't need to go 300 meters down to get geothermal energy. They're a volcanic island, 45 meters is enough. But whereas we've had Fukushima, and only a few years ago, the Japanese are moving away from nuclear energy very fast and bringing about an energy revolution, and we could do the same with regard to coal. The situation with coal isn't as dramatic as nuclear energy, but it ought to be possible to bring about this transition. Obviously, the situation was urgent in Japan. It was a true emergency. And
les alternatives de manière crédible,
developing credible
fictive, c'est que on était
alternatives was necessary because they had their backs to the wall.
c'est avant
The
de
first thing that we need
participer tous les
to
travailleurs,
do
c'est une bonne
before
chose
we get
pour
all
toi
the
et pour
workers
ton
involved,
enfant,
which is an
c'est
important
prendre la
thing anyway,
décision
but we need
de la
to
fermeture
make a
des
political
gaz
decision to
de charbon.
close down
Parce que
all
c'est
the
chaque
coal
fois
plants
qu'on s'appelle, qu'on fait une en altermoire,
because
c'est-à-dire qu'on essaie de dire oui,
every
on va repousser
time
progressivement, ça
we
ne
say we'll
marche
do it
pas.
gradually,
C'est à chaque
we'll
fois
do
qu'on
it soon,
interdit catégoriquement une énergie,
we know
que
it's
les
going
choses
to fail.
immédiatement
You have to do
de
things
remplacement se mettent en
immediately.
place. Et le Japon, pour
And then you're
un
motivated to
excellent,
find a solution.
est un
So I think
excellent
Japan is an excellent example.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci. Vous aviez
Yeah, I had a question.
demandé à prendre la parole, oui.
We'll keep it shorter. My name is Maximo from Attack Spain. So I guess my question is regarding what we were hearing, that we need a holistic approach to the just transition, and otherwise we're going to have failed regions which will be subject to radicalization, and that, for example, Alternative für Deutschland is now the leading party in Saxony. So I guess my question is a voter that used to vote for Die Linke and moves to vote for Alternative für Deutschland really a progressive voter that can be brought? I mean, in my mind, I cannot really see that. And in case there is some hope for these people, then what is the discourse? How does the discourse need to change? Or what is the engagement that we need to have with this type of people to bring them back to our, I guess, ideas? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Then we have the gentleman hiding behind the camera. I still can't see you, but I know you're there.
I'm here.
Ah, here we go.
Thank you very much. My name is Carlos Campillos. I'm a researcher at E3G, the think tank working to accelerate the low carbon transition globally. I'm going to keep it short as well. I have a question, but at the same time, it's a kind of reflection for all of us here today. So the Just Transition Agenda is an enabler for long-term sustainable development, where EU funds play a great role, right? The moment the European Commission is discussing the MFF for the 5 to 10 years after 2020, and of course that's going to regulate how EU funds are going to be spent in this period. So this is a unique opportunity to deliver the just transition, but also to implement the Paris Agreement on the ground. So my question is, how are the European left and its networks going to ensure that the MFF post-2020 is Paris compatible, it's fossil free, and also focused on delivering this just transition and this different model of regional development in the regions affected in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move to answering these three questions, and I have two people who have asked to ask questions. So first we'll go with the answers, and then we'll move forward with the lady in blue and the lady in black afterwards. So, who wishes to go ahead?
I can try to start. I think. Oh, yeah. Okay, Deutsch. Sorry.
Okay, I'll speak in German then. Yes, Japan is a good example of the fact that within a short space of time you can carry out industrial conversion, but I don't think that's the example we need, because there are plenty of those sorts of examples. What we need examples of is how such a quick conversion can happen while involving workers. Now, I come from a small town where the largest employer produces warships for Saudi Arabia, and it's very difficult to actually criticize this company for what they do, because a lot of the people in the town work for the company. Of course, they don't enjoy building warships, but they'd enjoy being unemployed even less. So if you want to get the people involved, you have to, reframe the narrative. And of course, warships aren't the same as coal. We could do without warships entirely, but we can't do without energy that's produced by coal. If we were then to say no more coal, that would perhaps mean no more cars and, no more many other things. But I think we need to be aware of what trade unions can do and what the role of trade unions is in this. Trade unions should see their role not just as a political one, but also of actors of social change. Often I experience trade unions as being quite conservative in terms of maintaining the living and working conditions of their people, which is fine, but it means that they're not willing to be as progressive as we would need them to be. There are the trade unions for energy democracy, which have already been mentioned, so there are some trade unions who clearly say no jobs on the dead planet. We need to have this conversation about what's going to happen. And there are certainly some ideas out there. We've talked about integrating the energy sector into the community to ensure that people don't work 40 hours a week but don't lose out. And economically, there's all these ideas that are out there. And what we need now is real reorganization of society, because with all these different narratives of justice, we're not only seeing competing narratives between the trade union and the environmental narrative, but in the next few decades we'll be seeing competition between two justice narratives which are even larger, one being just transition, which is funding transition in Germany for communities, workers and regions, including towns like the one I'm from. And at the same time, at the climate summits, we'll be hearing the discussion about loss and damage, which is fatal discussion within these conferences, because it's about who's going to pay for all the catastrophic impact of climate change. And all of us from northern countries who live at a very high level don't want to pay for it, and I'm sure that that's a discussion that we'll be hearing about in the next 20-30 years, whether or not the EU's money should be invested in the conversion of lignite areas or automotive sectors, or whether that money is spent on people who are losing their homes on an island that is sinking into the ocean, for them to be able to set up a new life on some other part of the planet. So anyone who involved in trade unions has to go into their trade unions and hold these debates, have these discussions, because I think there's still a lot of room, a lot of space there.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any further comments on these 3 questions? Oops, I had forgotten the microphone, sorry about that.
Yes, so just a second. Japan is an interesting place to watch, I think, but certainly we will have to see whether those reactors will come back online or not, and that is currently I think the big question there. But what I really wanted to reflect on is that we need to do more, as Carolina said, and it's about the more where I feel, and I was trying to say that also in my intervention, is about the burden sharing from the corporate sector, where I see a massive gap at the moment. One can say, yes, they should pay part of the bill. That's true, but actually it's a bit beyond that. It's the climate justice argument around, basically recognizing the fact that they're also part of this loss and damage issue. And if we look at past transitions that's been analyzed and monitored over the last decades, what we see is that usually the corporations try to pull out or minimize the burden sharing on their behalf, even go to the extent that they go bankrupt in order not to pay the dues for the transition, or even just for workers to have social security or retirement. So that's what we're seeing, and I think if we can do more, apart from obviously acting on Paris and delivering on the NDCs and incorporating them into national and regional policies. I think it is to make sure that we don't let corporations off the hook on this matter either, and that we demand that those reports that are coming out, financial reports about phasing out, selling stranded assets, that these will also adhere to the just transition criteria, and we can see that they're starting to save up. They're creating funds for providing social security to workers, for retraining, for relocation, and for retirement if that's the appropriate solution. So I believe that is a big area where we can do more, and then beyond obviously the national policy. And I hear very little about corporate engagement on this front. So that's to me the where we can do more, or what we can do more of area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any? I mean, I've seen him taking notes, so I figured he had something.
Very short comments. Well, I agree with the fact that we need good examples in all the levels, local, regional, and also international. But we don't have also to stop as imitating good examples. For example, in Spain, Germany is a good example in theory for. I know. but in the general opinion, Germany is a good example for renewable policies or renewable energies. And well, as Cornelia and her colleague told me time ago, the energy policy is not so good. So because for example, as I know, the gas consumption has go up. So we have to look for good examples, but we need to look for good examples of a complete transition, not only as I mentioned before, change of the technology source of the energy. And in this issue, I think that the local level experiences and examples are very great. So when I entered here, I heard about Barcelona this afternoon, which is great. But also in Spain we have other good initiatives like in Cadiz with a table for energy transition. Also in Madrid with a big program for energy efficiency in households. I think that in the local levels where we are closer to the citizens, and maybe when there are more governments, where the left have more governments, there we must start building this transition of not only economy, also about economy transition. Second, the EU funds and I understand the 2020 and well the climate targets. Well, now we are fighting in the European Parliament for these new targets for 2030, and well, there have been very interesting debates between what is technical possible and what is a political desire. I think this kind of discussions are not productive. I think that political and technical face to the same targets, the more ambitious targets. And talking about the EU funds, I also think that there are a lot of opportunities in EU funds to push an energy or a just transition. But we must say also that the EU funds, they are not always pushing for this just transition. For example, the Connecting Europe Facility Fund is going to invest a lot of public money in new gas infrastructures. I think the number is over 53 new gas infrastructures. And I think that from the left, we must also do a policy to orientate these EU funds to push for energy transition and for just transition. And well, the issue of if left voters are going to extreme right, I do not know which very good the situation in Germany, the real situation. But obviously in whole Europe there is an increase of extreme right, and they are increasing in these regions with the regions that are more hit by the globalization and the industrialization. And I think it's not easy also to talk about progressive voters, because the realm now is more complex, and well, a progressive voter can be an ecological, but maybe a bit liberal or in the other ways, in the other. So we have, I think we have to build also good speeches and good no speeches for the public. I think a good history and a good project of countries to create and to give this hope and to give this real and this honest alternative and this honest and real targets that these regions facing the industrialization needed.
Thank you. We had two more questions. Can you be real quick? Because if we can spend 5 minutes on that, then we need to get to putting our conclusions together so that we don't stretch the session too late.
Yes, it's not really a question. I just wanted to make a comment, particularly in relation to what Stefan Kuhner was saying, who very well reflected what I feel in many areas. But I don't think we'll be able to achieve any remarkable progress unless we push back the influence of companies. We can't leave it up to the market. We have to go to the balance of power in our countries, and that includes, pushing back on company power. You yourself mentioned Naomi Klein as an example, but that means we also can't be signing free trade agreements which give investors more powers than workers have. So I think that's a very important point. We need to change the balance of power within our societies, and the only possible way of doing that, the only hope I see, is by ensuring that the environmental struggle and a labour struggle be brought together, because only in that way can we stand up for workers' rights. I mean, there were flyers handed out just in front of RWE to the workers saying, our protest, our climate protest, isn't against you, it's against the company. And I think it would be good if the trade unions would also take a step towards the climate activists and not just viewing them as violent troublemakers, as some do. Not everyone, of course, but some. So I don't think that it's enough to look for good examples. We also have to make good examples ourselves.
Thank you very much. You had something to add as well?
Very briefly, I'm sorry for being so late. I've been in meetings all day today. My name's Elspeth Hathaway, so I'm here with Industrial Europe, so that's the European Trade Union Confederation that represents industry and manufacturing. So I'm sorry for only coming to the last panel. Extremely interesting. I would just like to raise two concerns that we have, which is obviously about, you might have discussed this already, carbon leakage. So about, if pollution isn't happening here, if it's happening in, I'm going to throw it out there, China, about the concerns that causes, not just for the environment, but also in terms of employment standards and the human rights issues that we know that goes on. And also about the energy transition and jobs. We know that some companies that produce some parts that are made that are used in renewable energy, such as Siemens or EDF, are actually offshoring jobs And I want to look at what we can do at a member state level and an EU level. Maybe this is something for the MEPs, that yes, if we're moving towards renewable energy, great, but why should we lose jobs here in the EU for something that's meant to benefit us? And on a personal note, and this is taking away anything to do with work, but as a Scot, as a Brit, and as someone who was in the European Parliament before and campaigned at home, regardless of if a vote is progressive or not, please, please, please don't that doesn't matter, you can't leave anyone behind. I'm from an ex-mining community in Fife in Scotland, and they are still suffering 30 years on from what's happened there. We cannot leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time has come to concluding, and I think Maxime wanted to say something, and you still want to say something. I have a couple things to say as well as to rebound on what you were just saying. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Yes.
Sorry, Elspeth.
Okay. To what Elspeth was telling, because I think it's quite fitting as a pre-conclusion. I would like to go back to the ETUC preliminary text for the COP23, where they have two very significant lines on page 2. It's very simple. It says, the ETUC points out that a just transition presupposes active support for workers in sectors that will suffer from the transition to a low-carbon economy. And I think they've put their finger on the real problem here. And it's what sociologists refer to as agency. Who are going to be the agents of the transformation? If the workers involved and others are the agents, meaning the active participant, it's going to be a very different transition than it would be if the big companies and others were the agents, or if the national bureaucracies are the agents. And I think that's what is important for us. And it's too bad that Sam Mason had to leave, because I had a chat with her earlier. And she said, if we want this to succeed, we have to go knock on doors. And that's what it is. We need to go knock on doors, and knock on the door of the trade unions and knock on the door of where people live, to involve them in this. Because if we leave the large corporation, or for that matter, large public entities like EDF in France, the keys to the transition, we are not going to have local co-ops providing energy to communities and helping out with the relocalization of industry. We are going to have technocratic, bureaucrat-led endeavors, of which the current French nuclear program is a great illustration. So that's what we need to pay attention to. The active support and the active involvement of these people is fundamental. Maxime, I don't know what you want to add on your own, or if anybody wants to provide some concluding comments, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. Well, actually, I wanted to kind of say the word that you were just saying. I would maybe add something else. Though. It is
Maybe
that...
I should talk to you first.
No, it's okay, don't worry. What I wish for us to do is to go back home and to observe to what extent issues related to a just transition have been adopted or not enough adopted by actors of political change, because one of the, let's say, missing actors, even though we had the presence of 3 MEPs, today are policy makers and key politicians from Progressive Party. It is extremely important, of course, that trade unionists and actors of, let's say, climate justice movement are sitting together trying to solve their differences. And but we need a political translation to these efforts. And I think it was Julien Rivoire from the French trade union FSU this morning who brought up the fact that 2 of the leading progressive, so-called progressive candidates in the previous French elections made of ecology-related issues not their top priorities, but almost their top priorities. And if you compare that to the, to the election 5 years back, it's an achievement. It's something that we never witnessed before. But it is not enough. And something that was not really discussed today, the fact that for too many people, ecology remains a matter of, well-off, middle-class people, and we are not enough in connection with what people from, popular neighborhoods might have to say about it. And of course, and it's great that this came up. It's extremely important that we knock on doors, and especially more so in territories affected by deindustrialization. It is extremely crucial, but it is not enough. We also have to knock on doors in territories which never had industries, and territories which were almost not that dense 20 years ago, but now are like, I'm thinking of course of all the outskirts of Paris, where you have the more potentialities and at the same time the highest rate of unemployment. And they don't feel represented by the political ecology, which I don't like to say they and to essentialize them, but they don't feel represented by this political current. And that's something that we should work on. And I wish that maybe in our next conferences we can try and figure out how to involve, grassroots activists from these areas and to listen to what they have to say in terms of ecology. Because I think someone else put it today, but Naomi Klein was saying back in Montreuil, in Paris, during the COP21. Montreuil is, by the way, a city of Seine-Saint-Denis, which is one of the territory I was referring to earlier. She said if the transition is inevitable, the shape it might take is not. And it comes, it's up to us and to our parties and to our unions and to our movement to come together and to make sure that the shape it would take, it's going to be, will benefit to all. I think I'll stop here. I'd like to also enjoy the opportunity that I have the microphone to thank the interpreters for the tremendous work that they have been doing today. And to let you know also that our discussions will be put online very soon. So thank you also to the two camera guys here. We will of course send you the links. Please get in touch with us if you need more information on how to get refunded, to get reimbursed if you were speakers, and we will of course help with that. Thank you to all for your participation.
Thank you, Maxime. And, Manuela had asked if she could add something, and also Cornelia, so I will pass on the microphone. No, you can decide.
Yeah. I'd like to add just one aspect. We discussed it in the second panel today. Like Frédéric Moch and Peter Singer pointed out on the panel on how to fund the just transition. We all agree what we need is not only the involvement of workers and to knock on doors and to apply the bottom-up approach, but we also need money. We need money. So it's not a secret to you that we are under austerity policy, and there's not much leeway for the member states to spend money on the creation of employment in low carbon sectors, in the renewable sectors, for energy efficiency measures in buildings, but we have to ask for it. And for example, the state aid rules, which are implemented by the Commission, and the Commission has discretionary power, so there we can ask, as a political demand, give us more leeway, first of all. Secondly, we should ask for some kind of golden rule that public investment done by the state in member state level, that it's not counted in the deficit procedure. So we can do this and ask for this without treaty change. It's just, it's a question of regulation or directive on the European level. I'm not an expert in it, but we can ask for it. So, and we should be aware, until the early 80s, there has been a sectoral industrial policy in the European Union where certain sectors and certain companies were supported in order to create employment. And this was abolished with a neoliberal change when the single market was introduced. So of course we can ask for it again. We take the argument there's a climate crisis, there's a social crisis, so we need some kind of different progressive industrial policy. And last point, actually the Commission does it when it comes to gas pipelines and liquid natural gas terminals. So there they take the money from the structural fund, from the FC, from the Juncker fund, and invest it in this kind of infrastructure. So we can easily ask, okay, the money is there, just spend it on different sectors. Thank you.
Thank you all then, and Cornelia?
Yes.
Concluding words after all?
I came a little bit late today, but I'm here, and yes, I would like tell and speak about one point for me very important. This is a cooperation also in our parliament. I think we have to do our work inside and outside of the parliament, and to combine it, to work very strong together in this point with the activists, with the trade unions, with whomever. It's not important which party, it's not important which organization. It's important to come to a change in not only the industry, not only economy, it's also a change in our life, yes. We have to change also our life. This is so complicated and so difficult. That's why we have the problem. It's not the same to say, yes, we have we go out from the coal sector and we do it in some years and then we come to the next sector. No. It's also a question of the life of the people, of identification and so. And we need new positive examples for a new identification in our society. Last but not least, I have also to thank you, Jean-Claude, Maxime, for Transform, and sorry, my whole heart is by Manuela. She is the organizer in the last month, was the organizer of the last month to come to this wonderful conference, and is not here? No? Ist schon gegangen. And the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Okay. And I have also to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, Transform. This is a very good cooperation. Yes, connected in the last years, and I hope also in the coming years. Thank you very much for all.